Hello everybody, welcome to part 3 of my Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age video review. In part 3, I'm going to give you my final thoughts on Roll Through the Ages, the board game. Now, Roll Through the Ages, the board game retails for $45, and while on the surface that may seem like a little bit high as a price, you got to realize the quality of the components you're getting in this game are absolutely fantastic. Now, just starting with the pegboards that come with the game, these are very, very thick wooden pegboards. These aren't cheap plastic or anything like that. These are wooden pegboards that have a lacquer on, which means that the color and the symbols on these boards are going to last for a heck of a long time because they put the lacquer on these to make sure that these are not going to fade or rub off anytime soon. Like I said, these are very, very thick pieces of wood, not cheap plastic or anything like that. The pegs that come with the game are wooden pegs. They're also very good quality. And the game's dice, all 7 of these dice are also made of wood. And these are actually pretty large dice. They're not small wooden dice like your standard dice that you get with most games. These are large dice, probably almost the size of the dice that come in the game, such as King of Tokyo or other dice games, which will use very nice quality dice. Not only are these dice wooden, but the symbols have been burned into them, which means that the symbols on these dice are not going to rub off anytime soon. So these dice are going to last for a heck of a long time. So the components you're getting, while $45 may seem a little bit high, the quality of the components you're getting are absolutely fantastic for this game. The game also comes with a very large pad of score sheets that you use for keeping score of the games, and these are double-sided, so you're going to get a lot of uses out of these. Now, I just photocopy them so I don't have to ever worry about running out of these. I've scanned them, I just print out copies whenever I bring friends over to play this game or whenever I want to play it, because this game does play fantastically solo, but I'll get into that when I give you my final thoughts. The game also has a fantastic insert which keeps all the components for the game. And now I don't know if this is going to be unique just for the Kickstarter version of the game, but it also does have ability to slot in the Mediterranean expansion also, meaning all the components, including the expansion, fit in this base box extremely well, which makes it very nice. And not only that, but you also get these very nice reference sheets that are actually made of pretty thick, stiff cardstock, which is going to last a long time. This isn't cheap, flimsy paper. This is actually going to last a long time. And it tells you all the developments and exactly what they do for the game, how much they cost, and how they can help your empire. The components for this game are absolutely fantastic. I can definitely say that $45 is a very good price point for this game, looking at the quality of the components you get in the game box. Every time I do a review for a board game, it's very important for me to take a few moments to talk about the family friendliness of the game. You know, I got 2 kids, love to play board games with my kids, and also discuss how fun a game is at various play counts. We all know there's those games where at certain play counts they're absolutely fantastic, and at other play counts they can be an absolute chore to bring to the table. Roll Through the Ages is a game listed for 1 to 4 players, and it does have some really fantastic solo player rules. You can play this game straight out of the box as a solo player game without needing homebrewed rules or anything. It plays very well. Basically what you're doing is you're trying to raise up your civilization, trying to beat a minimum score. And it's going to be kind of hard to beat that minimum score the first couple times you play until you understand the basic game. But once you do that, you can start trying to improve your game. It's kind of like playing Caverna, the solo player game, except unlike Caverna, this game is much more random and it doesn't feel like you're going to find a perfect play pattern that you can play with every single time you play the game. The game does scale all the way up to 4 players, and the game does play well with all its player counts from 1 to 4 players. There's just a couple caveats you need to understand as you start adding more players into the mix. Do understand that this is one of those games that when it's not your turn, there's really not much you're going to be able to do unless another player happens to roll a die that's going to allow them to demand tribute from you, where you have to figure out your military and decide if you want to start giving them goods so they don't get a whole bunch of tribute from you or not. Or if you have another player who happens to roll the conquest die, then you might want to start adjusting your strategy also if they're starting to do a lot of military and starting to do a lot of conquest, because those tribute points can pile up and start being a lot of victory points. You saw in the sample gameplay where I showed you where I scored over 30 points just in tribute, just from having a really good military. So while the conquest die won't directly affect you, you may want to pay attention to it, because if you notice a player getting a lot of conquest and they're building up their military, pay attention. Don't let them get those free victory points. You may want to start trying to do the same. Aside from the tribute and the conquest, though, you do have to pay attention. Make sure your opponents aren't trying to start getting a lot of skulls. If a player is playing very smart, they can try to intentionally try to get 3 skulls, and that starts affecting the other players. And the more players you add to the game, the more powerful 3 skulls can be. And in a 2-player game, cause another player to lose a couple of victory points may not seem like a big deal. In a 4-player game where you're causing 3 players to all lose those victory points, that can start making a big deal. Also, if you start building up your military on your turn and try to force a large skull roll, you can cause an invasion, which if your military is prepped for, you can handle it, while your opponents can start suffering lots of damage and lots of disasters if they don't have the military to prepare for an invasion. So I am happy to report that there is some player interaction between the players when it's not your turn, depending on the other strategies the other players are using. But if your players are using less aggressive strategies, or they're starting to suffer a lot of analysis paralysis, the game can feel a little bit long between the turns, especially in a 4-player game. If other players are starting to play less of a military game and more of a monetary game where they're trying to get a whole bunch of goods, so they start buying a whole bunch of these developments and starting to develop their civilization like that, and they're intentionally trying to avoid getting these skulls, the game can feel a little bit less interactive between the players. So when you have more players, it can feel more of like a multiplayer solitaire game where everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. So your enjoyment with the multiple player counts is going to be based on how your group of players plays these kind of games and how much you can just sit there and wait for your turn to come back around. If you have some really aggressive players, you're going to notice a lot of player interaction between the turns, and you're not going to mind more players added to the game. But if you're playing with some more sedate players who like to do their own little personal thing, it's going to feel like you're not doing much on your own turns, and those larger player count games, those 4-player count games, may feel like you're not really getting to do much when it's not your turn. Although, to be honest though, thanks to the randomness of the dice, analysis paralysis is not going to be a horrible problem, and the most you'll be waiting between turns, even in a 4-player game, is maximum maybe 10 minutes, especially if you're getting close to the end game where players are going to be rolling up to 6 dice. They're going to have to be juggling exactly what they want to do to get those extra victory points. They're trying to cram every single victory point they can get out of the game in an effort to win. Roll Through the Ages also lists as a game for ages 10 and up, and that is actually a pretty fairly accurate age range for this game. Now, while the dice mechanics may seem pretty simple, the gameplay itself is much more complex than your average dice game. Compare this to a game such as King of Tokyo, where the players are just rolling dice, taking the results, and having fun attacking each other, going back and forth. This isn't a game where you play exactly like that. The game does require strategy. You need to know what resources you need, when you need those resources, and where to properly allocate those resources in the early growing steps of your empire, in the middle stages of your empire, and finally in the end stages of your empire. You really need to be judging these things constantly and deciding which developments are going to help your empire the most, when to start building your ports, when to start building your provinces, when it's a good time to start relying on getting these monuments out there, or when maybe it's a good time to start working towards that military type of victory, or protecting yourself military-wise because you're noticing other opponents are starting to build up a large military, which means they could start trying to go in for some tribute. Overall, I think 10 years old is perfectly fine to understand how to play the game. A 9-year-old could definitely play this game also, but you're going to understand that as the children get older, you're starting to look at 11 and 12-year-olds, that's probably going to be a better age for this game, especially understand the deeper strategies of just how strategic Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age can be. Back in the days when the original Roll Through the Ages, the Bronze Age, came out, I spent an extreme amount of time playing that game. It was one of my favorite games for the simple fact it had some really good solo rules. You can pull it out, try to beat your prior score, or if you had some friends over, it was a pretty quick game. You just pulled out the dice, slung some dice, started playing, having some fun, and it was a really quick game for what it was. And then finally, when the app came out for the iPhone version of the game, I started playing a game a lot. I probably logged about 400 or 500 plays on Roll Through the Ages of the Bronze Age back when I had my iPhone. Of course, I'm not an iPhone user anymore. I'm an Android user now, and I don't have access to all the game apps, so I don't get to play it that way anymore. But I was still very excited when they made the announcement for Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age. Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age takes what I thought was already a really good game, Roll Through the Ages of the Bronze Age, and improves on it in many ways, making it a much, much better game in my opinion. To use another comparison, this is like comparing King of Tokyo to King of New York. They've taken some standard mechanics or taken a standard game and a game that I thought was already pretty good and have improved on to make a good game even better and turn a good game into a great game. They've made a game here that allows multiple strategies to go towards victory. Now, if you watch the sample gameplay, and unfortunately I made some mistakes in the sample gameplay, and that is one of the negatives I have about the game, and I'll get into that in just a few moments here. I don't want to jump ahead of myself. But I showed you two completely different strategies. I showed you a military strategy, and I told you a strategy of somebody just going towards a financial strategy. And you saw how both the strategies played out differently, and each player was allowed to use different strategies, and they weren't slaves to the dice and slaves to the results on the dice. They're allowed to actually have a strategy and work towards that strategy and not feel like you're being hampered by a dice roll and try and just take what you got and try to survive off of what you got. This isn't a game like that. Even though it has the randomness of the dice, it's done a great, fantastic job of making you feel like your dice results matter, your resources matter, and it never feels like you have a turn where you just get a totally wasted turn and you can't do anything with your turn. And that's really fantastic for a dice game and something that's very hard to achieve in a dice game. I also like how they incorporate the military in this game, making it so that your military is a possible strategy. Now, I know there's some conquest games that claim to be conquest games that give you a military and say you can have a military, and I'm not going to name a game, nations, where it gives you a military, but your military doesn't feel like it's really worth a lot. That's something totally different in Rolls Through the Ages. Your military here can be quite powerful if you develop it properly, which is really cool and something I really appreciate in any kind of civilization style game. Beyond the improvements they also made to the gameplay, comparing this to the Bronze Age, where your resources are fantastic, it never feels like you have wasted resources. They made it so your military is pretty powerful and can be very important to how you build your civilization. You have some very cool developments that can help your civilization grow in different kinds of ways. And also, I've already said this, but I also like how it never feels like your dice roll is ever wasted. You're always going to get at least some resources that are going to help you to grow your empire every single turn. And it never, ever in this game feels like your empire is stagnating at any time. Unless, and actually I can't even think of a way to make it so that your empire is ever stagnating in this game, unless you're purposely trying to play foolishly. Because every turn, you're going to get resources that you apply towards your empire and help grow your empire. The game also has some beyond awesome components. The dice are extremely nice. These pegboards used to track the resources of your empire are very nice. And again, these are solid wood. This isn't cheap plastic. This is solid, heavy-duty wood. You can throw this at somebody. Don't do it, but you could and probably cause some damage because this is heavy-duty solid wood. The components are fantastic. There's a very nice box insert, which is really nice because I shouldn't say the nice thing, the problem with wood, if it starts banging together, they're going to start chipping and everything like that. So it's really nice that they gave you an extremely nice box insert, which is going to keep all your components together, stop them from banging against each other so they're not going to take any extra damage, so these components are going to last an extra amount of time. You have plenty of score sheets. You're never going to run out of these anytime soon. They're double-sided, and if you do run low, you can always photocopy these very, very easily. And you also have these nice reference sheets for the tech board. And believe it or not, the rule book, even though I have to admit I have experience from the game from playing the Bronze Age, the rule book I thought did a decent job of at least teaching you how to play the game. Now, there are a couple negatives for the game, and they're probably more just going to depend on how you play the game and your kind of play group. First of all, the game visually doesn't seem like there's a lot going on. Basically, every single player is going to be looking at a pegboard. Every single player is going to be looking at this little piece of paper which tracks their empire. And it's not really one of those games that visually is going to attract other people's attention. It kind of reminds me of playing Through the Ages, the Vlaada Chvátil version of the game, which is a game that, much like this, is more of a game where people are just moving around little bits, but you don't see the overall empire growing unless you're actually in on the game. So visually, the game isn't quite as appealing as it could be, but if you do add in the Mediterranean expansion, that does throw in a little bit of a map for players to look at, which can add a little bit to the pleasing eye candy, but it's an expansion you do have to purchase. And I'm going to do a video review for this, and I have to say that if you have a chance to get the expansion with the base game, get the expansion. It's a fantastic expansion. It adds just a little bit to the game, but it's definitely worth adding to the base game. I've already mentioned this, but depending on your play group, it can feel like there isn't much to do when it's not your turn in this game. And again, that's really going to matter on your play group and how aggressive your other players are. If you have aggressive other players, you're probably not going to notice that at all. If you have players who like to work on just getting the economical victory and start not even worrying about the military, you may notice it a little bit, but it's only going to be in the 4-player games. In your 2- and 3-player games, you're probably not going to notice it at all. The final negative I have for the game is one that for some reason still to this day plagues me, even though I literally have hundreds and hundreds of games of the Bronze Age, and I've played this game a couple dozen times already, but I still occasionally forget to remember to use my developments. Sometimes I'll forget I have the leadership development, which allows me to re-roll a die, and I'll get a skull and I'll completely forget about it, and by the time I remember, it's too darn late. Sometimes I'll have the dying of development that's going to give me an extra good every time my turn comes around. I get the extra goods. I sometimes forget about that. Once in a great while, I'll even forget to take my extra food from having my irrigation or having my aqueducts advancement. And again, I don't know why, just for some reason I sometimes forget to do these things. I like to think I'm getting much better at it, but I know in my sample video, I know I made those mistakes a couple times, so as much as I think I'm getting better at it, I know I'm not. And it's just, I don't want to say it's a problem with the game. I think it just may be me, but sometimes it's easy to forget that. And I've noticed when I play with other players, sometimes it's easy for them to forget too. I kind of attribute to the same thing that happens when we play Sentinels of the Multiverse. It's another game where you get a whole bunch of bonuses and penalties sometimes, and sometimes you can just forget about those bonuses and penalties. It'll happen, you know, as you play the game more and more and more, it's going to happen to you less and less, but just understand once in a while it's going to happen. If you have a very understanding play group, nobody's going to care. You're going to reach the end of your turning and say, oh, guys, you know what? I think I forgot to take my extra good for having dyes. Or, you know what? I think I forgot to take my extra food for having aqueducts. Nobody's really going to care. And as you play the game more and more, this is going to happen a lot less. And eventually, it should stop happening. Overall, I think Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age is a fantastic game. If you're looking for a game for solo play, I can definitely recommend you pick up Roll Through the Ages. If you're looking for a quick dice game to play with your friends that has a lot of strategy, offers a lot of replayability, and has some fantastic components, check out Roll Through the Ages, the Iron Age. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review looking at Roll Through the Ages. Thanks for watching.